Amani Brooks adjusted her backpack as she approached the wrought iron gates of Hamilton University, the morning sun casting long shadows across the campus walkways. The campus was already alive with the hum of students hustling to class, the distant chatter of friends, and the rhythmic clack of sneakers on concrete. She felt a familiar excitement mixed with fatigue. Today was midterms week, and she had a full schedule. But nothing could dampen the thrill of being on the campus that had shaped so much of her life. As she stepped forward, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the ambient noise. "Hey, stop right there!" Amani froze instinctively. Two campus officers, Officer Grant Hawks and Officer Lucas Kane, had stepped in front of her, blocking the path. Their stance was rigid, and their eyes scanned her like she was a suspect in some crime she didn't know she'd committed. Amani tried to keep her voice steady. "Good morning, officers. Is there a problem?" Hawks sneered, his lips curling into a thin, dismissive smile. "Yeah, there's a problem," he said. "We need to check your ID before you go anywhere. You don't look like you belong here." Amani's heart skipped a beat, not because she feared being stopped, but because the condescension, the assumption that she was out of place, hit her in a way that was both infuriating and humiliating. She reached into her bag, pulling out her student ID, her fingers tightening around the card. Kane shifted uneasily, clearly less comfortable with the confrontation, but Hawks didn't seem to notice. "ID, now," Hawks demanded, leaning slightly toward her in a posture meant to intimidate. A small line had begun forming behind her as students slowed to watch, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Amani felt her face flush, but she refused to show fear. She handed over the ID, and Hawks snatched it, scanning it with exaggerated slowness, muttering under his breath. Every second stretched unbearably. "Hamilton University. He said, glancing up at her, eyes narrowing. "You're not supposed to be here yet. Maybe we should hold you until your classes start, or maybe you should just leave for today." The words landed like stones, and Amani realized that somehow she might actually be forced to miss her first class of the day. Around them, students whispered, some glaring at the officers, but no one intervened. Amani straightened, drew in a steadying breath, and met Hawks's gaze, silently refusing to shrink despite the weight of the humiliation pressing down on her. Imani stood frozen for a moment, her student ID still in Officer Hawks' hand, as the line of students behind her shifted uncomfortably. She could feel the weight of every gaze, some curious, some sympathetic, most silently judging, not her, but the situation. Officer Kane, standing slightly behind Hawks, cleared his throat. Grant, maybe we should let her go? She's obviously a student." Hawks scoffed, the sharp edge of his authority never dulled. "Obviously? That's not obvious enough. You never know these days." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though loud enough for Imani to hear. "We can't be too careful with people like her." The words stung, sharp as cold steel. Imani's hands clenched at her sides, and for the first time, she felt the familiar mix of anger and disbelief coursing through her veins. She wanted to snap back, to tell him exactly what he was, but Kane's hesitant glance told her he might intervene if she pushed too hard. So she measured herself, keeping her voice calm but firm. "Officer Hawks, I'm a student here. I have every right to be on campus. I'd appreciate it if you allowed me to proceed to class." Hawks laughed, a low, mocking sound that made several students glance back over their shoulders. "Proceed? Not so fast. I think you're going to wait right here for a little while. Maybe we'll call your someone. Make sure you're supposed to be on campus." Imani's heart sank. She knew exactly what this meant. She might miss her lecture, and if word spread, it could become more than just a temporary inconvenience. Kane shifted again, unease written across his face. "Grant, maybe this is going too far. She's not doing anything wrong." Hawks snapped his head toward Kane, eyes flashing with irritation. "Too far? There's no such thing. Rules are rules. You follow me or get out of the way." Imani's chest tightened. The humiliation of standing there, watched by peers, officers asserting control over her mere presence, was overwhelming. Sweat prickled her hairline despite the cool morning breeze. She noticed a few students muttering to each other, glances flicking between her and the officers, a mix of curiosity, anger, and pity in their expressions. Imani drew a slow breath, forcing herself to stand taller. "I'm not leaving. I have class in 10 minutes, and you are stopping me for no reason." Hawks smirked, holding up the ID like a trophy. "No reason? You tell me. What reason do I need? Maybe you're just here to cause trouble." At that, Imani felt the first surge of anger boil over. Her voice, when it came, was steady, but it carried the edge of someone who would not be belittled. "I am here to study, nothing more. You're making assumptions about me because of how I look. That's not your choice to make." Hawks paused, momentarily taken aback by her composure, but then, with a huff, he waved his hand dismissively. "Fine, wait here. Maybe someone can verify you belong here." The officers stepped back slightly, but the tension remained. Imani's stomach twisted. She could feel time slipping away, the clock ticking toward the start of her lecture, and with every passing second, the realization sank in. This encounter was going to make her late.
Imani shifted from one foot to the other as the minutes dragged painfully past, the morning sun now warming her shoulders through the thin jacket she wore. Behind her, the line of students had begun to disperse, some offering sympathetic glances, others shaking their heads in frustration at the officer's behavior. Hawks and Kane stood just a few feet away, their conversation now low enough for Imani to barely hear, but the disdain in Hawks' tone carried clearly. "See, she's trying to play it smart, probably has friends on campus who'll back her up," he muttered. Kane, ever hesitant, responded quietly, Maybe we should just let her go, Grant. This is unnecessary." Hawks snorted, brushing Kane off with a wave. "Unnecessary? That's not how this works. She needs to know authority when she sees it. Besides, someone should keep an eye on her." Imani clenched her fists, feeling her anger rise, but she forced herself to remain calm. She glanced down the pathway, spotting the clock tower looming above the quad. 10 minutes until the start of her first class, and already she was going to be late. Her thoughts raced. If she missed her lecture, she would have to scramble later to catch up on notes, risk falling behind on assignments, and explain herself to her professor. Yet it wasn't just that. It was the humiliation of being treated like an intruder on her own campus, the whispers of students who had stopped to watch, and the sneers of Hawks that felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. She drew in a slow, steadying breath, willing herself to stay composed. "Officer Hawks, Officer Kane," she said, projecting her voice enough to draw their attention back. "I am a student here. I do not need to prove my worth or my presence to you. You are blocking my right to attend class." Hawks's lips curled into a tight, dismissive smile. "You think saying that changes anything? Rules are rules, and you're unusual. We have to be careful." Kane shifted uneasily, and for a brief moment Hawks' eyes darted toward the small plaque on the campus gate listing the dean's office number. Imani's gaze followed his, and she realized that the officers might soon be facing the consequences of their assumptions, but she could not yet predict how quickly it would unfold. Time continued to slip past like water through her fingers. The chatter of students, the distant honking of cars on the perimeter streets, and the rustle of leaves in the morning wind all faded into the background as Imani's mind raced. If she didn't act soon, she would miss her lecture entirely, and her carefully planned day would unravel. But more than that, she wanted the humiliation to end, not with confrontation, but with recognition of the truth. A truth that Hawks and Kane were blind to. She belonged here. Imani's patience was wearing thin, though she forced herself to remain calm, aware that any sudden movement or sharp word could escalate the situation further. The line of students behind her had mostly dispersed, leaving only a few witnesses who had slowed their steps to watch the unfolding drama, their expressions a mix of annoyance and disbelief. Hawks, growing increasingly frustrated, tapped his foot and folded his arms, his authoritative posture demanding submission. "I said wait here. Don't try to make me look foolish," he barked, his voice echoing across the quiet campus quad. Kane shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at the small crowd that had gathered. "Grant, come on, look at her. She's just standing there. She hasn't done anything wrong," he muttered. Hawks shot him a sharp glare, his jaw tightening. "Don't argue with me, Lucas. You think she's smart because she's calm, but calm doesn't mean innocent." Imani took a deep breath, feeling the heat rise in her face as anger mingled with the humiliation pressing down on her. She refused to let them see her flinch. "I'm calm because I know who I am and I know my rights. I do not need to justify my presence to you," she said steadily, her voice clear enough for the few remaining students to hear. Hawks smirked, holding her ID between his fingers like a prized possession. "And yet here you are, having to prove it. Not everyone can handle the rules, you know. Some people—" His words trailed off as he glanced toward the small plaque on the campus gate again, the name of the dean's office catching the corner of his eye. Kane noticed the hesitation in Hawks's expression and raised an eyebrow. "Grant, what's wrong?" Hawks muttered something under his breath, his confident posture faltering for a fraction of a second. Imani's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing that the officer's composure was cracking. She stood a little taller, her chin lifted, her heartbeat steady despite the knot in her stomach. If they had even the smallest inclination to verify her identity, now was the moment when everything could shift. Around her, the morning air felt heavier, the quiet hum of campus activity contrasting sharply with the tension at the gate. Students whispered, phones were subtly raised, and Kane looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Hawks's hand trembled slightly as he held the ID, and a flicker of doubt passed over his face, a hesitation that suggested he was about to discover a truth he could not have anticipated. Imani kept her posture perfect, her voice calm, but inside, a spark of anticipation ignited. She knew the truth would change everything, but how exactly it would unfold, she could only wait to see. The tension hung in the air like a storm cloud, ready to break. The silence at the campus gate was suddenly pierced by the ringing of a nearby office phone, startling Hawks and Kane. Hawks muttered irritably as he answered, his fingers still clutching Imani's student ID. "Grant Hawks," he barked into the receiver. There was a pause, and then his face began to change. First confusion, then a creeping realization. You want me to check her last name?" His voice faltered. Kane leaned in, squinting, his earlier unease now mixed with curiosity. "Check what?" he asked quietly. Hawk's hand shook slightly as he held the ID closer to the receiver, and the voice on the other end, the dean's secretary, spilled a simple, devastating truth. "Sir, that's Dr. Elijah Brooks' daughter, Imani Brooks. She's in your presence right now." The words hit Hawks like a punch. He froze, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Kane stepped back, his eyes wide, finally understanding why Hawks had been so agitated earlier. Imani, maintaining her calm exterior, allowed herself the tiniest inward smile, though her chest still pounded with a mixture of anger, relief, and vindication. "That's impossible," Hawks muttered under his breath, almost as if saying it aloud could erase the truth. Kane let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "I guess maybe we did go too far," he admitted sheepishly, unable to hide the embarrassment on his face. Students who had lingered near the gate whispered among themselves, some craning to hear the exchange, their earlier curiosity now tinged with schadenfreude at the officer's predicament. Imani's voice cut through the murmurs, calm but firm. "Yes, it's true. I'm Dr. Brooks' daughter, and I am a student here. You have just humiliated me without cause, and now you know exactly who I am." Hawks's face flushed, a mix of anger, shame, and disbelief painting every line. He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped as the realization fully sank in. His assumptions, his biased behavior, and his condescending tone had all been directed at someone whose presence on campus was indisputable. Kane shifted uneasily beside him, silently wishing he had intervened sooner. Imani stood tall, the morning sun catching her face, her eyes steady and unwavering. Around them, the energy of the campus seemed to pause for a moment, the tension so thick it could almost be touched. Students whispered, some smirking, others exchanging glances of astonishment at the dramatic reversal unfolding before them. Hawks finally swallowed hard, his authority evaporating under the weight of truth. Kane avoided Imani's gaze, unsure where to look. The gate that had moments ago been a stage for humiliation was now a spotlight on the officers' error, their prejudice laid bare for all to see. Imani took a slow, measured step forward, reclaiming the space that had been denied to her for so long, her dignity intact and radiating in every precise motion. The officers could no longer hide behind intimidation, and the realization of their mistake hung over them like a heavy, unavoidable shadow.
The tension at the campus gate shifted instantly after Hawks and Kane realized who Imani Brooks really was. Students who had been lingering nearby whispered excitedly, some raising their phones to capture the scene, while others shook their heads in disbelief at the officer's audacity. Imani stood straight, her backpack straps firm on her shoulders, exuding a calm that belied the storm of emotions inside her. Anger at the humiliation, frustration at the wasted time, but also satisfaction that the truth was now undeniable. Hawk's face flushed to deep red, and his attempts to regain authority were feeble, his words fumbling. We were just, he stammered, trailing off as Kane's uncomfortable shifting seemed to confirm his own embarrassment. Kane muttered under his breath, "Yeah, we should have just let her go." Students around them snickered quietly, the murmur of gossip spreading quickly across the quad. Imani's voice rang out, measured but unwavering. "I am a student here. I am Dr. Elijah Brooks's daughter. You have just humiliated me publicly, wasted my time, and assumed things about me based solely on appearance. I expect a formal apology and an immediate correction of this behavior." The words were calm, but the authority behind them was unmistakable. The officer's attempts to intimidate her had utterly failed, and everyone nearby could see it. Hawk's jaw tightened, and Kane avoided eye contact, shame overtaking the previous arrogance that had dominated the scene. A small crowd of students began clapping quietly, not loudly enough to seem mocking, but enough to acknowledge the reversal of power. Imani's friend, Talia Morgan, who had arrived just in time to witness the encounter, rushed up and whispered, "Imani, are you okay?" Imani nodded, though her chest was still tight from the anxiety and tension. "I'll be fine. Just let's move," she said softly. She took deliberate steps toward the main campus path, reclaiming her dignity with every movement. Hawks, meanwhile, fumbled with his radio, calling for backup as if to prove he still had control, but the absurdity of the situation was already evident. Kane stayed beside him, silent, aware that the optics were disastrous. The few students who had remained were now capturing video clips on their phones, whispering about what had just unfolded and the lessons in judgment and bias it displayed. Imani walked past them with steady, even steps, her head high, her presence a reminder that she belonged here, no assumptions required. The officers were left fumbling, their earlier confidence shattered, a cautionary tale unfolding in front of an audience that would not soon forget it.
By the time Imani had taken several steps toward the main quad, a small commotion had begun to gather around the campus gate. Whispers of her identity had spread quickly. Students exchanged astonished looks and hushed conversations about the audacity of the officers and the sudden revelation. The phones that had been quietly raised earlier now captured every movement, the tension thick in the morning air. Moments later, the campus security supervisor, Captain Victoria Lane, arrived briskly, her sharp heels clicking against the stone pavement. She took in the scene at a glance, the flushed face of Officer Hawks, the sheepish demeanor of Kane, and Imani standing tall, composed, and undeniably in command of the moment. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice firm, authoritative. Hawks stammered. We were just verifying her, credentials, Captain." Kane looked down, muttering something under his breath that Captain Lane didn't hear. Imani stepped forward, her posture impeccable, her voice calm but carrying the authority of someone who had been wronged. "Captain Lane, these officers humiliated me, blocked me from entering campus, and forced me to miss class without justification. And all of this was based solely on assumptions about my appearance." Captain Lane's sharp gaze swept over the officers, and Hawks's smirk evaporated as he realized her full awareness of the situation. "Is that true?" she asked. Kane nodded reluctantly. Hawks opened his mouth, but no words could salvage the moment. Captain Lane turned her attention to Imani. "I see. And you are—" Imani raised her chin slightly. "Imani Brooks. I am Dr. Elijah Brooks' daughter and a student here at Hamilton University." The words landed like a hammer. Captain Lane's eyes narrowed, and she turned back to the officers, her expression unreadable but cutting. "You've not only disrespected a student, but you've displayed unprofessional behavior that is unacceptable under any circumstances," she said firmly. The morning air seemed to grow heavier around them as the weight of her words settled. Students nearby murmured, cameras raised and capturing the confrontation. Imani could feel the tension slowly shifting. No longer was she the one under scrutiny. Hawks's jaw tightened as he realized his mistake had now escalated to an official confrontation. Kane avoided her gaze completely, silently regretting his passive role. Captain Lane motioned for both officers to step aside, her tone brooking no argument. "We're going to handle this properly, and you," she said, pointing at Hawks, "will explain your actions to me and to the administration immediately." Imani took a deep breath, steadying herself, her heart still racing from the humiliation, but now tempered by the satisfaction of authority finally recognizing the truth. Around her, the students whispered, some in awe, some in approval, the moments stretching in the morning sunlight as justice, slow but inevitable, began to take shape.
Imani walked across the sunlit quad, each step deliberate, her head held high despite the lingering flush of anger and embarrassment. Students nearby whispered excitedly, some nudging their friends, others discreetly filming the scene with their phones. Even from a distance, the effect of the earlier confrontation could be felt. The campus seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, as if everyone had witnessed a small but significant upheaval in the social order. Imani's mind raced, not with fear, but with calculation. She had already missed precious minutes of her first lecture, but the officer's blunder and the presence of Captain Lane ensured that the incident would not be swept under the rug. She could feel the subtle stares of professors and administrators now, their expressions a mixture of surprise, concern, and approval as they recognized her identity and composure. Talia Morgan, her close friend, fell into step beside her, murmuring softly, "You were incredible, Imani. I can't believe they actually—" Imani smiled faintly, but kept her gaze forward. "It doesn't matter what they think," she said quietly, the weight of authority now subtly shifting in her favor. As they approached the academic building, murmurs spread among the students in the halls. The story of what had just happened at the gate had traveled fast, and word of Hawks and Kane's humiliation had become campus gossip within minutes. Some students who had never met Imani paused to nod or whisper congratulations, while others cast wary glances toward the officers, who were now clearly aware that their actions were being scrutinized and recorded. In her lecture hall, professors and peers alike offered subtle smiles and acknowledgments as she entered, her presence commanding attention without effort. Imani took her seat quietly, the echo of the confrontation still reverberating in her mind, but she felt a growing sense of power and agency.
Though the day had begun with anger and humiliation, it was rapidly transforming into a statement. Assumptions based on appearance could be challenged, authority could be held accountable, and dignity could be maintained even in the face of blatant injustice. Meanwhile, Hawks and Kane were left to navigate the fallout, reports being filed, whispers spreading, and the undeniable fact that their reputation on campus had suffered irreparable damage. Imani opened her notebook, jotting down notes with calm precision, her mind already shifting to focus on her studies, but the energy from the morning's events lingered like a quiet triumph, a reminder that truth and composure had the power to reverse even the most humiliating circumstances. By mid-afternoon, word of the morning's events had spread like wildfire across Hamilton University's campus. Hawks and Kane were summoned to the dean's office, escorted under the watchful eye of Captain Victoria Lane, their earlier confidence completely eroded. The hallway felt unusually heavy, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the marble floors as students glanced up from their conversations and phones, some smirking knowingly. Inside the dean's office, Dr. Elijah Brooks sat behind his polished mahogany desk, his calm yet commanding presence filling the room. He gestured to the officers to stand at attention, though they shifted uneasily, clearly aware that their behavior had crossed an unspoken line. "Officers Hawks, Kane," Dr. Brooks began, his tone even but layered with unmistakable authority. "I've been informed of your conduct this morning at the campus gate. You not only humiliated a student, but you did so based on assumptions that are completely unacceptable in any professional setting. Do you understand the gravity of this situation?" Hawks swallowed hard, attempting a weak nod, while Kane avoided eye contact, shifting awkwardly. Dr. Brooks continued, "Your actions have consequences. Captain Lane has already documented your behavior, and this incident will be included in your personnel records. Additionally, there will be sensitivity training and a review of your roles within campus security." Hawks opened his mouth, seemingly to protest, but no words came, his authority and pride fully stripped away by the realization that his bias had been exposed to the highest level of campus authority. Kane quietly muttered, We didn't mean." Dr. Brooks raised a hand, cutting him off. "Intent is irrelevant when the effect is harm. You must learn to respect students and their rights, regardless of appearance or assumptions." Meanwhile, across campus, Imani had returned to her studies, her phone buzzing constantly with messages from classmates who had witnessed the morning's confrontation or caught snippets of the incident online. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, with students sharing videos, commending her composure, and expressing outrage at the officer's conduct. Imani allowed herself a small, private smile, a mixture of relief and quiet triumph. Though the morning had been humiliating, it had transformed into a moment of clarity for the campus. Prejudice and assumption could be challenged, and accountability was unavoidable. Even as the semester's challenges loomed ahead, the events of the morning had shifted the campus atmosphere. Students, professors, and staff alike now knew that Imani Brooks belonged to Hamilton University in every sense, and that the arrogance of authority could be dismantled by dignity, courage, and the undeniable truth. By late afternoon, the campus had settled into a quiet rhythm once again. Though the echoes of the morning's confrontation lingered in conversations, in the whispered stories circulating among students, and in the eyes of faculty and staff who had witnessed the ripple effect of the incident. Imani Brooks sat in the library, her textbooks spread across the polished wooden table, her notes precise and organized, but her mind was not entirely on studying. She glanced up occasionally as students passed, some nodding respectfully, others offering quiet smiles of acknowledgement, their reactions a subtle tribute to the way she had handled the morning. Even the professors she passed earlier had greeted her with recognition, a shared understanding of what had transpired and the dignity she had maintained. The incident at the campus gate had become something of a legend by now, a story of authority challenged and assumptions corrected. And Imani carried it with a quiet grace, aware of both the impact and the responsibility that came with it. Across campus, Hawks and Kane were completing a series of mandatory sensitivity workshops, their posture and demeanor noticeably subdued compared to the arrogance they had exhibited hours earlier. The lessons were uncomfortable, and the consequences were tangible. Their reputation on campus had been compromised, their professional judgment questioned, and the realization of their bias unavoidable. Meanwhile, Dr. Elijah Brooks had personally checked in with Imani, offering reassurance and support, but he had also emphasized her autonomy and strength, allowing her to reclaim control over the narrative and over her schedule. Imani returned to her class the next morning with a quiet sense of confidence, her place on campus reaffirmed not by privilege alone, but by her composure, courage, and insistence on being treated fairly. The students who had witnessed the events continued to discuss them in hushed tones, but for Imani, the day marked more than the humiliation or the public reversal of power. It was a testament to the subtle, unshakable strength she carried, the ability to navigate injustice with intelligence and restraint, and the reality that authority, no matter how intimidating, could be held accountable. By the time the sun set over Hamilton University, the campus had returned to its usual rhythm, but the story of Imani Brooks and the officers at the gate had left an indelible mark, remembered not as a scandal or spectacle, but as a quiet affirmation of presence, dignity, and truth prevailing in the face of prejudice.